After my brother stole my wife and my entire family took his side, I disappeared without warning and rebuilt my life far away from everyone who betrayed me. But years later, they came looking for me and what they found was not the broken man they left behind. I'll give you the short version of who I am so the rest of this makes sense. I work in commercial land acquisitions. I broker deals between private developers, equity groups, and municipal bodies moving large parcels of land. It's slow, detailed work. It requires reading documents that other people find unbearable, catching clauses buried on page 11 that nobody else looked at, and being the calmest person in any room where serious money is changing hands. I've been doing it for 14 years. I am very good at it. I built everything I have from scratch. My family wasn't poor, but nothing I own came handed to me. Every professional relationship, every deal, every asset in my name came through deliberate work over a long time. I say that not to impress you, but because it matters to what follows. I don't build things carelessly. That includes my marriage. My Sarah and I had been together 11 years, married for 6. She runs a boutique event styling business, high-end private parties, corporate launches, the kind of work that requires taste and relentlessness in equal measure. I seed funded it when she had the talent but not the capital. The business grew. I was proud of her. We had a home I designed and she had furnished, no kids yet by mutual agreement, and a life that felt chosen and solid. My brother Drexel is 4 years younger than me. 3 sports nutrition retail stores. When he was launching, his credit standing wasn't strong enough to secure the commercial leases on 2 of them. So, I co-signed. Beyond that, I extended him a formal commercial loan, properly documented through my attorney at the time, with a repayment structure and specific clauses we both reviewed before he signed. He didn't read it carefully. That was his habit with contracts. I didn't think much about it then. The work trip was supposed to run through Thursday. A site acquisition deal, 3 days of meetings, then home. On Tuesday morning, the buyer's party pulled out before we'd even reached the table. A zoning issue that should have been dead weeks ago had resurfaced at the worst possible moment. Meeting cancelled. I rebooked the first available flight and landed before noon. I didn't text Lysandra, not for any strategic reason. I just hadn't felt the need to announce my own arrival home in 6 years of marriage. It was my home. I parked, let myself in through the front door, and went upstairs. I want to be careful about how I describe what I found because the way I describe it is the whole point. There was no chaos, no scrambling, no shock, no desperate attempt to explain. Lysandra and Drexel were in our bedroom, and what hit me before anything else, before any specific detail registered, was how settled the room felt. 2 people, completely at ease. The specific ease of a Tuesday afternoon that had 100 times before. Drexel looked up at me. He didn't flinch, didn't panic, his face didn't do anything urgent or ashamed. He just looked at me the way you look at someone who's arrived slightly ahead of schedule. He said, "Hey, you're back early." That was the entirety of his reaction. I stood in that doorway and felt something happen inside my chest that had nothing to do with rage. It was colder than rage. It was the specific, horrible sensation of understanding something you would have given a great deal not to understand. The ease in that room wasn't the ease of 2 people caught off guard. It was practiced. Long settled. They had stopped being afraid of getting caught a long time ago. I was the disruption. Not them. Me. I turned around. Walked downstairs. Sat at the kitchen table. Poured a glass of water and drank half of it. I sat there for 1 hour. I didn't call anyone. I didn't move. I just let the full weight of what I'd walked into arrive completely without rushing it. Then my phone started moving on the table. My mother's name. Then my father's. Then my uncle. Perhaps. 3 separate calls in under 10 minutes. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I picked up my father's call. His voice was careful. Too careful. The way a man sounds when he's already decided what he's going to say and is managing his own nerves about saying it. "Son, come to the house. Everyone is already here. We need to talk." I looked at the glass of water in front of me. "I'll be there," I said. I counted the cars outside my parents' house before I pulled in. Both of my parents, Drexel's, my uncle Prab's, 2 I recognized as belonging to my aunts, 1 that belonged to a cousin. 7 cars on a Tuesday afternoon, which meant this had been organized before I ever walked through my front door today. Calls had been made, people had been gathered, a room had been arranged. I sat in my car for 30 seconds, looking at the house. Then I got out. The living room had been set up. There's no softer way to put it. Chairs positioned inward, angled toward a center point. Everyone already seated. When I walked in. Varric and Sona at the front, my aunts on the side, sofa, Prab in the armchair he always took, cousins lined along the far wall. And Lysandra, already there, seated beside an empty space that had clearly been left for Drexel, who arrived 2 minutes after me and took it without acknowledgement. She had left our house before I did. She had beaten me here. That single fact told me the shape of everything before a single word was spoken. My father started. "Varric is not a cruel man. I want to be accurate about that. But he is a man who has spent his entire life treating conflict as a threat to be contained rather than a truth to be faced, and that instinct was running the room completely. He used the word situation. He said that Drexel and Lysandra's feelings had developed naturally and that, unfortunately, these things sometimes happen in families. He said he understood it was difficult. He said he was asking me, not telling me. He was careful to say asking, not to make this harder for everyone. He said the family needed to stay whole. He said he knew I was a reasonable man. My mother spoke after him. She said I had always been the strong one, that I had always found a way to handle things. That she knew I wasn't the kind of person who let something like this take him under. One aunt said it would only get harder if this dragged out. The other said she just hoped we could all sit down for a proper dinner before the year was out. Lysandra said nothing through any of this. Her face was arranged with careful neutrality, not guilty, not defiant, just managed. Drexel stared at the floor in front of him the entire time. Farah said nothing. The cousins said nothing. Not one person in that room said sorry. The word did not appear. The question of how I was, what I felt, what I needed, what had been done to me inside my own home, was so completely absent from the room it might as well not have existed as a concept. I let all of it land. Every word, every nod, every careful sentence. I didn't interrupt. I didn't shift in my seat. I let it run, until it was finished, which took about 12 minutes. When the room went quiet, I asked one question. Is this what everyone here believes is the right course? My father said yes. My mother said yes. Farah nodded once. Both aunts nodded. The cousins didn't object. Lysandra gave a small, deliberate dip of her chin. I took that in, all of it. Every person in the room and what they just told me about themselves. Then I nodded. Okay, I said. I stood up, crossed to my father and shook his hand the way I would shake the hand of a counterpart at the close of a failed negotiation. Firm, professional, final. I said goodnight to the room without directing it at anyone in particular, and I walked out. I drove home. Didn't stop. Didn't call anyone. I went directly to my home office, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. 3 years ago, during a major restructuring of my business assets, my attorney had built a set of contingency protections into my financial architecture, clauses and structural arrangements that would sit dormant until specific legal triggers activated them. I'd done it because I was careful by nature. I had not thought about that work in 2 years. I found the folder now, opened it, started reading from the beginning. By the 3rd page, something settled in me that I hadn't felt since I'd walked upstairs into my own bedroom that afternoon. Clarity. Let me explain how I think because it matters here. In my line of work, the most dangerous moment in any deal is not when things go wrong. It's the moment just before signing, when everyone in the room has already decided they want the outcome and starts glossing over the language that gets them there. I have destroyed deals at that exact moment. Sat across a table from people who were ready to celebrate and said, this clause on page 9 is going to be a problem. Sometimes they listened. Sometimes they didn't. The ones who didn't always came back to that page eventually. I read everything. Every word, every subordinate clause, every triggering condition buried in definition sections that lawyers write in the quiet hope that nobody checks. I do this not because I'm paranoid, but because I understand that a document is only as good as your understanding of it, and an agreement you haven't fully read isn't an agreement. It's a trap you've set for yourself. 3 years ago, during a significant restructuring of my business assets, my attorney walked me through a series of contingency protections. Her recommendation, not mine. She said that at my asset level, with the number of co-signed obligations and seed arrangements I had in play, it was standard practice to build in trigger clauses, legal mechanisms that would remain dormant under normal conditions and activate only when I chose to activate them. A formal written demand here, a dissolution filing there, access revocation tied to pre-authorized restructuring language. I'd done it without much thought about ever needing it. I was careful by habit, not by fear. Sitting at my desk that night, reading through it page by page, I understood for the first time what I'd actually built. The first call I made was to my attorney. I explained the situation in 2 sentences, what I'd found, what had happened at my parents' house. She didn't react with surprise or emotion. She asked what outcome I wanted. I told her. She said she'd have everything drafted and ready for a 7 a.m. call. The following morning. I slept 4 hours. Was at my desk by 6. I knew in the following day the machinery was in motion. The joint household accounts were restructured into my sole name business holding entity, technically clean, pre-authorized by language in a financial restructuring agreement Lysandra had signed 2 years earlier without reading past the summary page. The access she had to my company's operating account, secondary, always secondary, visibility without true authority, was formally revoked through the same mechanism. Lysandra's event styling business had been running on a seed funding agreement we'd formalized at launch 6 years ago. She'd signed it. Her advisor had been present. On page 5, there was an investor protection clause. In the event of marriage dissolution or a formal written demand for repayment, all IP, client lists, and brand assets transferred back to my holding company. It had seemed almost unnecessary to include at the time. My attorney filed the dissolution proceeding that afternoon. The clause activated. Drexel's commercial loan was the simplest piece, a properly documented note with one very specific provision. I could issue a written demand for full repayment within 30 days, upon a triggering event of my choosing as the lending party. We'd written it that way deliberately. His people had reviewed it before he signed. They either hadn't caught the clause or hadn't explained it to him clearly enough for it to register. Either way, his signature was on it, and the demand notice was formally served to his registered business address the following morning. I did all of this without a single phone call to anyone in my family. Without posting anything. Without giving any warning to any person in that house. I felt no anger while I worked through it. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect rage to be the fuel for something like this. It wasn't. What I felt was closer to the focused stillness I get in the final hour before a major deal closes. Everything accounted for, every variable mapped, nothing left to chance. Late that evening I made myself something to eat and sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet around me. My phone buzzed. The family group chat. My mother's message. Dinner at the house Saturday. Everyone together. This is important for all of us. I read it once, set the phone down, picked it up again, typed one word into the chat, coming. Saturday morning I woke up early, made coffee, and went to my home office. On the desk was a manila folder I'd assembled over the previous 3 days. 4 documents, printed cleanly, organized in the sequence they needed to be understood. I'd reviewed the stack the night before with the same attention I give a closing package before a major acquisition, checking for clarity, checking for gaps, making sure every relevant clause was marked and every figure was accurate. There were no gaps. I put the folder in my bag, finished my coffee, and drove to my parents' house. The table was set for a full dinner, food already going on the stove, the kind of slow-cooked meal my mother prepares when she wants a room to feel like home. Everyone was there when I arrived. Varric, Sona, Prab, both aunts, the cousins, Lysandra, Drexel. The atmosphere had the deliberate, careful warmth of people who had collectively decided that a corner had been turned, that the difficult part was behind them. My mother touched my arm when I walked through the door. "I'm glad you came," she said. I took my usual seat at the table. I ate. I answered questions about work with the same level of detail I always used. When my father made a comment about a development project he'd read about in the news, I gave him my honest professional opinion. When one of my aunts asked about the coastal acquisition I'd mentioned months ago, I told her it was progressing well. I spoke when I was spoken to and I spoke like myself because I was myself sitting at that table. There was no performance involved. As the meal went on, I could feel the room settling. Drexel's posture opened up. My mother's smile stopped being effortful. My father made a toast, something brief about family being the only thing that lasts, and people raised their glasses. Lysandra glanced at me once across the table. I looked back at her calmly and then continued eating. They thought the hard part was over. I let it run all the way through the main course. Then I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. "Before we get to dessert," I said, "there are a few things everyone here should know." I opened it and began placing documents face up one at a time. No preamble. No raised voice. Just paper laid out in order. The first was the commercial loan demand notice already formally served to Drexel's registered business address. Full repayment of the outstanding balance due within 30 days per the default clause triggered by my written demand earlier that week. His name on the signature line. His initials on the clause page. The second was the written notice to Lysandra's event styling business. The seed funding agreement with page 5 marked, the investor protection clause highlighted. IP, client lists, brand assets all transferring back to my holding company upon the dissolution filing, which had already been initiated. The third document covered the primary property. Title history. The relevant clause from our marriage contract. The formal process now underway through my attorney's office. The fourth was a single typed page. Every loan, guarantee, and financial transfer I had extended to members of this family over the past 11 years. Names, amounts, dates, all of it documented. All of it subject to formal repayment demand already issued to each relevant party through my attorney's office during the week. I didn't explain any of it. I didn't need to. I'd made sure the documents explained themselves. The room moved through quiet, then confusion. Then something that broke open fast. Drexel grabbed the loan document, and I watched his face process the specific sequence of a man realizing that something he'd treated as a family arrangement was always, legally, something else entirely. Lysandra reached page 5 of the seed agreement, and whatever careful neutrality she'd been holding dissolved completely. My father picked up the property document. My mother said my name, just my name, the way people say a word when they don't have another word available. I stood, collected the folder, left the copies where they were. My attorney's details are at the bottom of each document. All further communication goes through her office. Please don't contact me directly. I said goodnight to the room. Didn't look at anyone specifically when I said it. Walked out through the front door and pulled it shut behind me. I drove 40 minutes to a furnished apartment at least 10 days earlier. 6 months paid up front under my holding company's name. Took the elevator up. Set my bag down on the kitchen counter next to my old phone, the personal one, the number every person at that table had, and looked at the screen. 17 missed calls. I put it face down, stood at the kitchen window for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Then I walked to the desk, opened my laptop, and began looking at flights. I want to be precise about something before I go further. There's a difference between running from something and removing yourself from it. Running is reactive. It's driven by pain looking for distance, by the need to put miles between yourself and whatever is chasing you. What I did was neither of those things. I made a deliberate, sequential decision to withdraw from a life that no longer contained anything requiring my presence. I wasn't escaping. I was closing something, sealing it, moving in the only direction that made sense. The old phone was retired within 48 hours. SIM pulled. Number dead. New device. New number. Given to 2 professional contacts whose active work required it and nobody else. Anyone who needed to reach me for a legitimate reason went through my attorney's office. Her answer to every inquiry was the same. He's unavailable. All matters are being handled through this office. The coastal acquisition project gave me a reason to be somewhere else that was entirely real. It was a large parcel deal I'd been deferring for 2 months, good money in it. Required physical presence for site visits in a series of municipality meetings spread across several weeks. I booked the flight that night. Was on a plane. By Thursday morning, I rented a place near the water. Small, clean, a decent desk and a functional kitchen, and nothing else I needed it to have. I set up my work there, and I worked. The first week was the most clarifying experience I'd had in years. I had expected some kind of gravitational pull, not regret exactly, but the weight of what I dismantled making itself felt. There was none of it. What I found instead was a quiet so complete it took me several days to recognize what it actually was. It wasn't emptiness. It was the absence of a noise I'd been living inside for so long I'd stopped hearing it as noise. It had just become the background condition of my life. I worked through the mornings. In the evenings I walked along the waterfront near the rented office space. I read. I cooked simple food in the apartment kitchen, and ate it without distraction. I slept 8 hours a night for the first time and longer than I could accurately measure. None of the solitude felt uncomfortable. It felt honest, like the correct proportion of space for a life that was still being figured out. I did not monitor what was happening back home. I want to say that plainly because I think it's the part people find hardest to believe. I didn't check. I didn't ask anyone to keep me informed. I didn't look up names or track developments or find indirect ways to watch the fallout arrive. I had built the mechanism, placed the documents, and walked out. What those documents did next did not require my presence to do it. The machinery was already running. I had no interest in standing over it. The only contact I maintained with my attorney was strictly administrative. Signing documents, approving filings, confirming receipt of formal correspondence that required my direct response. I didn't ask how anyone was reacting. I didn't request updates. I handled what needed my signature and returned to the work in front of me. What I thought about instead, in the evenings mostly, was the family meeting itself. Not Lysandra, not Drexel, but the room. The arranged chairs, the carefully prepared speech. The 11 people who had gathered on a Tuesday afternoon and collectively decided that my feelings were a variable to be managed. The strong one. The one who handles things. The one who can move past this. I had been their financial architecture for over a decade. Loans, cosigns, guarantees, quiet transfers when someone needed help and didn't want to name it directly. I had done all of it without keeping score because I believed it was what a functioning family looked like from the inside. I had not understood until that living room that the structure only worked in one direction. My stability was something they drew from. My pain was something they routed around. That understanding didn't devastate me. It reorganized me. Quietly and completely, the way a building settles after something structural shifts. 6 weeks in, the acquisition deal closed. Strong terms. The client was satisfied. My counterpart on the municipal side asked if I'd be interested in a follow-on project in the same region. I told him I'd need a few days to look at my availability. I went back to the apartment that evening, made coffee, and sat at the desk, opened my laptop, pulled up my project files. At the bottom of the folder, sitting below the active acquisition documents, was a subfolder I hadn't opened in 11 years. It was labeled with a single word. My parents' family name. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I opened it. The subfolder contained 11 years of records. Every transfer, every cosign, every guarantee, every quiet deposit made into accounts belonging to people who never asked how I was doing. I had kept it all, not obsessively, not with any conscious intention of ever using it, but because I was the kind of person who kept records the way other people keep habits. Automatically, completely, without thinking much about why. I sat with it open for a while, not reading exactly, just looking at what 11 years of being the strong one actually looked like when it was written down in columns. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. I'm telling you this because I want to be accurate about what that folder was and what it wasn't. It wasn't the source of my anger. It wasn't a wound I'd been nursing. It was just documentation, the same kind I kept for every professional arrangement in my life, and looking at it that night didn't change anything I'd already decided. Everything that needed to be done was already done. The documents were already on the table. The mechanisms were already running. I closed it because there was nothing left in it that required my attention. Months passed before I learned what had happened to any of them, and I use the word learn loosely. What I received was a fragmentary picture assembled through the narrow administrative channel I kept open with my attorney. Information that surfaced because it was legally relevant to matters still being processed, not because I asked for it. Drexel's 30-day repayment window came and closed. He couldn't cover the balance. He attempted to liquidate one of his store locations to free up capital, but due diligence surfaced supplier debts attached to that location that destroyed the buyer's interest immediately. He refinanced what he could at rates that cost him badly, extended himself past any comfortable margin, and spent the following year under financial pressure he had no history of managing. His stores were not built for that kind of sustained strain. I thought about that occasionally, not with satisfaction. More with the specific recognition of a structural problem I'd identified years before it became critical. Drexel's businesses had always been built against the assumption that there was a floor beneath him. A cosign here, a credit line there, the quiet understanding that if things got genuinely difficult, I was a phone call away. The floor was gone. What he'd built without it turned out to be less solid than either of us had understood. Lysandra's business claim resolved in my favor. The seed agreement held exactly as written. 6 years of client relationships, brand equity, and professional identity, none of it transferable without a release from my holding company, which I did not grant. I was told she attempted to rebuild under a different name in the months that followed. My attorney monitored briefly for IP violations. There were none, so I let it go entirely. I had no interest in pursuing her past the point where my legitimate interests were protected. That point had been reached. The financial calls into the broader family created fractures that I heard about only in outline. Some of the amounts were manageable, some weren't. But the documentation itself, the formal letters, the precise accounting of what had moved between us over a decade, forced a set of conversations that family had spent years carefully avoiding. People blamed Lysandra. People blamed Drexel. From what filtered through, Lysandra and Drexel, under the weight of everything collapsing around them at the same time, stopped being a comfort to each other fairly quickly. I responded to my parents once. A short letter, 3 paragraphs, transmitted through my attorney's office. I wrote it myself. I named what had happened, plainly, without embellishment. I named what had been said in that arranged room, the specific words, the knotted agreements, the thing my mother had said about me being the strong one. I told them I forgave them, and I meant it, not because what they did was acceptable, but because I had no interest in carrying the weight of it indefinitely. They were my parents. I wished them well and was sincere about that. I also told them I would not be returning to that version of my life. Not as a warning. As a simple statement of fact. I didn't send another letter after that. The coastal office became permanent. The follow-on project the municipal contact mentioned turned into 2 more after it. I found a place to live that fit who I was becoming, quieter, more deliberate, organized around work I cared about, and a life that didn't require anyone's approval to hold its shape. I'm not going to tell you this story is about revenge. I've been careful about that framing throughout and I'm careful about it now. Revenge implies I was trying to hurt people and I wasn't. I was trying to close something that needed closing using the only tools I had that were both effective and entirely within my rights. The documents existed before the betrayal. The clauses were written before I had any reason to use them. I was careful long before I needed to be. What I know now that I didn't fully know then is this. The people in that room made one mistake that cost them everything they thought they'd gained. They looked at my silence and mistook it for surrender. My silence was never surrender. It was the last thing I did before I got to work. They thought they won something the night they arranged those chairs and told me what had been decided. What they actually won was my absence. And my absence, it turned out, was the most expensive thing I could have given them. Not with anger, not with revenge, just with the clean, complete, permanent fact of being gone. Signing off. I won't be updating this. Everything that needed to happen has happened. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you really like our videos, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great day.